Welcome to the live stream, starting almost exactly on time. What is happening? The world is ending. We are the Indie Bros. We are doing some game industry discussions today. Indie Studio Pitfalls. I'm your host, Bumpy McSquigums. I'm joined by Cupogoodness and a Tiny Disaster. Hello. How are you two today?
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going all right. It's going all right. We are here. We are live. The cup is gigantic. It's okay.
Yeah, huge cup. Is there a way to get me less gigantic?
No, you're fine. It's having to resize it for the green screen.
Are you guys seeing my face? Is that looking weird? Like, I think the lighting's kind of weird on it. Or am I good?
It's fine for now. Worst case, I'll switch us over to.
I think I'm having what do you call it?
Midlife crisis. Yes.
The filter issues with the green screen.
So we'll just go here, and it'll be fine.
Chroma key. Oh, I look much better now.
Yeah. Smaller cup. Boo.
Yeah, autumn sale. Oh, actually, that's fine. I like the quality.
We'll just leave
Look
the
at
autumn
us,
sale
all
there.
equal size, all equal sizes. No, I mean that's worthy of mentioning before we get into our topic today. The autumn sale. That's Steam's third biggest sale. I don't know, like somewhere in there. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I bet you it performs really well. I think the summer and the holiday sale is probably the tops, but this one is definitely a big one. This is, of course, an all hands on deck kind of sale where if you have a Steam game that is priced or has anything like DLC that's priced or in-app purchases that's priced, you want to put it a little bit on discount or whatever you need to put it on discount to make sure you're involved in this kind of thing. It's too late if you haven't already, but you still have time to get involved with the winter sale if you haven't yet. So this is a thing that we're going to keep reminding people of doing. Get involved in sales all the time, not just for your revenue. It's not devaluing anything by putting your game on sale as long as it's the right percentage every time, and then get the additional exposure from that, the new wish lists, the fresh blood, the fresh meat, go from there.
The fresh blood.
I saw Tales of Majayal, so I was like, we're getting real,
real spooky times.
Visceral. Roguelikes are great. Go get a roguelike. That'll make your life happy if you're just hanging around at home all the time. Roguelikes are good. Tales of Majayal is a good one. Actually, it's a top one.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I mean, we're in that bias. We represent it, but
I liked it long before I ever started here.
And I was going to say before
I got the like 5 years
before we ever hooked up with Tales of Majayal. Tales of Majayal was already declared one of the top roguelikes out there.
Now, again, arguably, because everybody's gonna have their own opinion, but arguably, yes. I still think it's the best one out there.
I like going to, the different like roguelike audiences and groups and communities out there. Like there's a good roguelike Discord, all that kind of stuff. And yep, it's always in the award discussions. It's always in the annual reminder to go look at these kind of roguelikes. It's an evergreen roguelike kind of thing. So that's really cool. Like, and of course, the developer that we work with is still adding content to it, basically constantly.
Indeed, he is.
Or at least consistently, because he does like kind of bigger patches and DLC releases. But the game is always feeling like it's freshened up all the time. So.
Yep. All right. So, what would you like to start with today? You said not to ask you what's next, but where would you like to start for our discussion today?
Well, I think for as far as like formatting goes, Tiny Disaster has like the best mind out of the two of us. And Bumpy, you have a good formatting mind too, but just between the two of us, Tiny Disaster.
I'm not awake right now, so you have to forgive me.
Bumpy doesn't want to make the decision.
Right, and that's totally fine. TD, where do you want to start on this? Like, where do you think that we should start when we talk about indie pitfalls? There's obviously a very sore something that sticks out in a big way is like the top pitfall, the one thing that we're going to probably be discussing in detail and in like sort of different facets and stuff like tied to money.
Okay, so I do have an idea. It's not necessarily the one that's going to be the biggest, even though that does tend to be where we start. But I think we should talk about what we were talking about just in pre-chat right there, because it can be a bit of a positive, and like we don't want this chat to all be it's all bad working at indie studios, because that is very much what we love. So
yeah, and it's not
before we got into the chat, we were talking a bit about the pros and cons of like working from home working in kind of a solo collaborative online
we feel
developing that way instead of in a bit like building.
Yeah, we feel like it's a pitfall to not kind of understand if you don't understand the realities between the difference of like an office space versus working from home, working virtually with a team. It can be a pitfall to just presume that's going to just going to be a one-to-one transfer over, and it's just not the case if you're used to working in an office space. And then you go into the indie space, and they say a lot. This as a great example. There's a lot of AAA folks that move to become indie developers. In that kind of transition, the space that they were in and the space that they're moving into are going to be completely different in a lot of different ways. And that starts with you're in control, right? Of in most cases, unless there is someone, if you have a boss or something, then you kind of go with the rules of the studio, so to speak, and that would be kind of similar to an office. But in most cases, if you're an indie studio, you're either working autonomously or you are on your own essentially for a lot of the time. And or like it could be like, hey, this is your area of expertise. You have this amount of time to do it. We'll check in a couple of times, but other than that, it's like that across maybe weeks or even months of time. You might not have any kind of check-in or someone a manager or anything like saying, is this done? Is this going to be coming along? So if you're not used to that lack of structure, then that's something to adjust to. And also there are little things to consider as well. Like, when I first started working from home in my 20s, I was like wanting to work all the time. So where did I put my computer? Right next to my bed. That's, it's not really a great idea in the end. Like over time, you want to create, if you can, even if you don't have, a ton of rooms or a room in your place, you want to create spaces, safe havens, the differences between where you work and where you relax, where you are, at home. I feel like that's a pitfall that not a lot of people who work from home really think about at all at first, because it's not something that it really is. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a negative at first. It's just kind of this mental thing that creeps up where you're going, man, I'm in the same space all the time, whether it's work, play, that kind of stuff. And to some extent, it's hard to avoid if you like Bumpy and I like to play video games on our computer, which is where we work most of the time. So that's just kind of going to happen. So it's up to us to kind of make sure we're mixing it up a little bit, and at the very least have a place to sleep that's sort of separate from where we're sitting and such. And it's good to have that kind of, again, home versus work area to defined. Otherwise, you can get into sort of an unmotivated funk. There's other things that can happen. It's just I'm trying to relate to my personal experiences. I know everybody's going to have their own experiences through that, but burnout can happen through that as well, because maybe you don't. Maybe you're passionate about what you're doing and you're free now. You're unchained. You don't have to go get up at 8 in the morning, but you want to get up at like say noon and work till 3 in the morning on what you're working on and that kind of thing. That's fine for a little while if you have that kind of passion, but if you're doing that consistently, you're going to burn yourself out most likely. This is something we see, across the board in all like walks of development, including like I read something recently about like how the Roblox development community, or the reason why Roblox is such a lucrative thing right now is because it's like one of the most popular platforms on the planet right now for consumers. And then developers are like 15 to 20-year-olds who just work as hard as they can and burn themselves out. And then there's a new space available essentially when they can't develop anymore because they've just burned themselves out on doing this. Is this healthy? No, you shouldn't be doing this anyway. But it was just an interesting tidbit about, oh gosh, how this works and what people are doing. So game development in general, indie game development, any kind of artistic creation in general, probably as this goes for, like writing a book, etc. You can get really passionate about it if you're on your own and not really monitor this. This is something we've talked about before with like, burnout, all that kind of stuff. That's a natural, normal, pitfall to talk about when we get into, indie dev pitfalls. But that starts with the fact that you work from home. You don't have any kind of social arrangements in person necessarily. And so it can become this sort of endless thing Something that I use to make sure that I don't just get into the endless void of work all the time is my family, right? Like, it's like I don't want to just completely disregard them while I'm stuck here. And yet, some days and pandemic, all that kind of stuff, there are times when they are here. They're just hanging out, and I have to be in here working. And so there's just it can be tricky. And so that is something to consider. It can be really tricky depending on your family situation. Obviously, your space in general, what you have to work with, your home equipment, right? You have to understand what you have to work with at home, and if that's good enough. And if not, Bumpy as a streamer, I'm sure has gone through a lot of trials and tribulations in terms of the gear and equipment that's required to do what he does.
It's true.
Another side of it, while you breathe and drink and refresh a little bit there, is the creative element of, like, even if you have the work-life balance all sorted out, if you're working on something like a game, especially when you're part of a team and you're not the only one making decisions, the creative flow of collaborating with other people isn't necessarily better or worse working online. I know a lot of us have so much experience talking to people in video chats like this, or back and forth on Slack, all of that. So it's doable, but it's different, and that's worth looking at as well as you're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for you career-wise, how you want to do your game, how big you want your team to be. I saw something on a small studio on TikTok this week who was like, people keep asking, like, oh, are you hiring? And they were talking about even just the communication overhead with being a small studio, and like, the more people you bring on, the more people you have to talk through every decision with, but waiting for everyone to be online at different times and all of that, it's difficult. So
right.
it's just something to consider.
Yeah, and there's two schools of thought there that I've seen kind of come out the wash. One is the way Indie Brothers operates, which is, we understand that, given our limitations, we cannot ask our contractors necessarily to be available 24/7, etc., or even at the same hours, like you said. A lot of us are working off of different time zones, and it's just one of those things where it's less of a headache for everyone in the group. And as long as our clients understand that they're going to be getting a response in 12 to 24 hours, as opposed to, we can't just, for certain people in certain times, we're able to drop everything and do what we can do. But it's not something that we certainly put in our contract, or something that we, make sweeping statements about, like, we'll be able to just, at a drop of a hat, be there, that kind of thing. It's like, we'll do our best at that. But that is in the context of, my stream team head is a 4-hour difference. My social manager is 3-hour difference. My Steam analyst is 7 hours difference from my time zone. There's just a lot going on there. I'm not going to all require them to be in the same space, the same time, like, consistently. That's not, I don't feel that's fair to anybody, and I don't feel that that's conducive to a good work environment. That said, I've gone to a talk before where they were pushing the idea of the virtual office, essentially. So what that is we're all like, what we're doing right now is a good example of the setup that would start that situation. We're all looking at each other. We can all see each other, except for now we're just going to be on, I guess, mute and typing and doing our work. And if someone needs something, they can ask, and they're sort of there. And the reason why they're there is because they're our expected work hours. They don't have to be the exact same hours for everybody, but there has to be crossover. There has to be enough crossover that if someone has a question for someone else on the team, that can be answered. This, to me, is really efficient if it can be done right. It's just really complicated, and I think it's really challenging to pull off. And I think you really have to have the right kind of people for it. I think most people would be like, ugh, like with it. But that said, that's just kind of my perspective. But they want you to essentially, be, and this is like a regular indie studio. It's not I'm not talking about like a AAA or even a AA studio or anything like that. Just a 10-person, 6-person studio that says we're all going to be in our seats for at least 2 hours a day. And then everybody else is going to be kind of at least crossing over a little bit, who needs to be crossing over, and we'll be able to visually confirm that we're all sitting there doing that kind of stuff. And of course, if people have to get up and do breaks, they're not like going to be, crazy about it, I would hope. But that is one approach. And to me, That's not my approach or the approach that I would take in most cases, and especially doesn't make sense for the companies that I work for or work with. But I can see how it would work if a studio wanted that, and the individuals involved in that studio wanted that type of environment and trying to be as efficient as possible to not waste any not just man hours, but like, because that could come into play, but just days on the schedule. You'll lose days on the schedule if you don't have that really strict kind of working together at the same time because of communication just needing to go back and forth, and that's okay with me. I got no problem with that. Yeah.
2 points I would try not to lose. First, I think the best way to turn any of this into a pro is finding the right team, because every indie studio or anything in this world is going to work a little differently. Like, as you said, your time zone's a little different, but Josh, Bumpy, and I tend to work a little later, so it kind of evens out a little bit. We tend to be more evening people and that kind of thing. And then what was my other point? Efficiency and losing work days and stuff. I know the game I used to work with before starting with Indie Bros, so at the beginning of COVID, the owner was concerned that it was like his team would be less efficient working from home. But I don't remember what the stat is on like how many hours people actually work in an office. It is not 8. Whereas I feel incredibly guilty ever clicking the button for my time here if I'm not working. So I feel like it's going to vary and depend on how you're running your team. But
yeah, that's a great point. It's really important to understand the difference between 8 hours at an office and 8 hours of full work at home. That's different. When I worked, and I talk to my wife about this all the time, and she talks about how she is consistently interrupted from getting into that flow state of work because of people coming into her office for questions about their job, or even worse, just to socialize, even though it's not the time or the right time to do that as far as she's concerned. That's not really something that's kind of figured out or sussed out in the office as much. And I hate it. I remember when I was like 23 and I was trying to get my work done, and it was just constantly like, oh, I have to play these social interaction games as well. And I was just like, this isn't helping me. And, looking back, remember Office Space? There was, if you haven't seen it, no problem. But there's a part in Office Space where he kind of breaks down his day, and he's like, honestly, by the time I get to lunch, I've done about like 25 minutes of real work. Like, he really goes over it and stuff like that. He's like, I'm spacing out a lot of the time because of how much they work me overtime and stuff like that, and how I'm just burned out and stuff. So he just goes, he kind of, that's a great insight into, if you don't monitor how people are working in your office, like, they're probably not as efficient as you think they're going to be, and they're not going to be getting done as much as you think. But that said, those social interactions, that kind of stuff, some people like that. Some people are motivated by that, and I'm not against anything like that. I just think that you got to know the difference. And then, to your point, when you get at home, you don't have to necessarily be upset if you have put in 3 or 4 good hours and you feel kind of done for the day. It's okay. Unless there's a deadline or something that other people are involved in that are expecting you to make, stop making earlier deadlines for yourself than you need to. That's, again, going to lead to burnout. Like, and it's a mental game. You don't even write it down. It's just something like, you're like, I would like to get this done today. This is, again, my experience. Like, I have a lot of that, compulsiveness to try to complete a task that I start, or try to, like, say, I'd really like to get this done today. But some projects and, some things that you're working on either take a longer time to get done, or you need to digest more and not just rush through it, and you need to, like, think about it, and it takes multiple days to do that properly. So those are things to think about, but always, have some grace and forgive yourself if you're feeling like, oh, I didn't work that much today and I'm just tired and I don't feel like working anymore. Probably a red, or like a yellow or red flag that you need to give yourself some rest and get ready to start again when you're ready to, but not just push through.
So going back to our original point here,
what was that?
What was that? That's a good point. Essentially the working situation, and you were talking about having a space that's specifically for work versus home, and try not to overwork because of that, and so on and so forth. Well, because a lot of people, and it's true, a lot of people do tend to, hey, I can work from home. I can work whenever I want. I'm going to go and just do 20 million hours of work and so on and so forth. However, there are people that are the opposite. They have a hard time self-motivating, and having to
Yep.
work from home can be very detrimental. That's why I agree, but maybe for everyone it's not the same reason, but I agree that you need to have a specific workspace where you go to and you're like, I'm working here and nothing
Right.
else right now matters, so I can focus and know that this is like my office that I'm in doing the job that I need to do.
Because you have to be disciplined, and to be disciplined, you have to practice it. And if you haven't practiced it, you might be like, oh, cool, Netflix is here.
Yeah.
I get Netflix all the time, that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, but you need to do your work too.
Yep.
I mean, I think people that work from home that don't have all those social interactions at the office are more susceptible to like funks and depressions and things of that sort as well. Like, because you're just not, mixing it up as much. Again, if you're not someone who's hugely social, that might not be the profile for you. But it fits my profile. Like, I can get into like kind of funks and kind of just feeling down if I'm not having. Virtual interactions actually have helped me significantly. Having these interactions, even having this doing this stream here is important to me to sort of stay connected, right? Stay connected to people. Remember who I'm working with and like what I'm doing this for. I like working with people. I like kind of improving our lives together as a company, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like the motivations that keep me going. But you have to find those when you work from home, because you can get kind of murky. I'm not saying straight up depressed, but you can just get kind of fuzzy if you're not connected with people as much.
Also,
as a funny story, and a flip side to the office is my sister wanders down here to get my Subway order. I'm like, I am live on the internet. I cannot talk right now. So it's
delicious.
The pandemic has very much taught us that everybody's home working situation is different, and there's no one straight answer.
Oh yeah, and if this stream goes longer than the time we normally have, I will have a 5-year-old on my arm before the end of it. So there's definitely, my son will come in and he doesn't care about what we're doing. So he cares, he appreciates it, but he doesn't necessarily think he has to be excluded from being involved in it at the time and stuff. So anyway, as far as I'm concerned, being live is important, but we're only semi-professional here. Send your Subway order over to her. I mean, I don't want you to miss out on that. That's delicious. Good. Yeah, exactly.
As far as workspace too, I feel like if you are going to have an office, and you're going to have to work and so on and so forth, it might take a while, but if you find a place and stuff that you need around you that makes you happy, that meets all your needs, even if you have to slowly build it for over the, however many years. Like when I started off doing YouTube stuff, it wasn't even a desk. It was just like a stupid small card table that barely could fit on. And then we got a table, which was also terrible because it had this like cross piece where I couldn't get under the desk. Hated it. And I had that literally until 2 years ago. And now I have a nice L desk, and I love it. It's great. And then, I've got, my monitors, my microphones existing now, and all these upgraded things slowly over time. And it's stuff, you start off and you're like, all right, you're just going, and then you're like, what would make my life easier? This. And then you work toward that goal. It's good to like know what you need and try to fulfill that, because it's going to make you happier. Your work situation and like place that you're working should not stress you out. Maybe the work itself might stress you out a little bit, but where you're at doing it should not stress you out if you can do that. Not everybody has that option.
That's a great point. And one thing I'll mention here is, and I don't think he'll mind me mentioning this, Inibro's co-founder Riabi, a couple of years ago ended up taking up some, putting in just a little bit of money into a co-working space. So like essentially you could go to a space that had, like office area that other people would work in, but you weren't working necessarily on the same things. It just was just go in and do your work and have a computer space and all that kind of stuff. And that worked for him because he wasn't getting what he wanted to get done necessarily in the work from home environment. So he looked for another option there. And so that's something that you might look to if you crave the office environment a little bit more. And but you're indie and you work from home, and that's just kind of how it goes. Obviously, make sure that the pandemic restrictions are good to go with this co-op working space. But there's a lot of those out there.
My wife,
I know if there's
the same way. She wants a space that she can just go and it's actually sort of that way, but also kind of different. she wants a place where she can go to be alone, kind of type thing. Because even here, like, she has a room upstairs that she can go to and be alone, but there's still noise and stuff that gets to her. So she wants a place where she can go and like read or do whatever she wants to do, and not have to worry about anything else and be distracted or bothered and just no noise. She has a clinic at home, but she would even consider moving the clinic to like an office space so she could do all that.
Yeah, so like in Ryabi's case, if he goes at the right hours, he can get that alone time as well, right? Like, so it works. I think it's still, he's going for the same thing. I think the office space socializing is part of it, but he also wants a quiet space away from everyone, right? Like just to be by yourself, right? Like, yeah, so you can really focus in, and that's what you need sometimes.
My office is built out of bookcases. You can kind of see the wall. It's like, it's just a big basement, and I've built myself a wall, but not having a door to close. I miss it, but it's all finding a balance.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like you got to just work with your space as best you can. And Bumpy said it best. You get into your space, you do what you can with it as best you can, and then as you continue to work in that space, decide what you like and what you don't like about it, and see what you can change over time. Little incremental improvements can make a big difference. So
I'm stuffed at the back end of the bedroom, basically. So it's great until my wife wants to go to sleep. Then it's like, well, crap. Then I do all the stuff that I can't, physically speak and do. So it's all good.
Right. So based on your space and situation, when your hours are that you need to get certain things done, and when hours are where you can do whatever kind of thing. Yep, that's right.
So I think that's
Froxus.
I think that's pretty decent, like coverage of the whole situation of like where you work, how you work, how it could be different for an indie studio versus like a AAA or even other jobs where you go to an office every day. You may be working from home, and even contracting out Skype calls or Zoom calls or whatever might be how you interact with your people. Is there anything specifically about calls and stuff like that you guys want to talk about before we move on?
Well, just make sure for me, my cardinal rule is don't hold a meeting unless it makes sense to. People have work; they need to get that work done. So never call a meeting for any or get a call or going or whatever for any reason that's not extremely necessary.
If it can be an email, let it be an email.
Yeah, let people be. Meetings can really stress some people out, like or throw their game off in terms of their efficiency. I noticed that some people do crave meetings as well. Working at Indie Brothers for the last several years, we have worked with a dozen plus different people, and everyone's different. Everybody has a different kind of you have to know that some people like interactions, and other people are like, please just leave me alone if you don't have to talk to me. You know what I mean? It's like, I get it. I totally understand. Like, I understand both sides. So it's just you make sure that the people who don't want to necessarily meet, you still have to ask them, meet me in the middle here a couple of times. We're going to have to, do certain things, but I understand that you want that as well. So this kind of transitions a little bit into another pitfall that we have listed, which is presuming you'll be able to do all facets of the game's development, like kind of on your own. If you're an indie, if you like start as a solo dev, I feel like people who are really educated about this don't really have this pitfall. But say if you're like someone who's just getting started, young, wannabe developer or whatever, or just moving into the space for the first time and see, hey, oh wow, I can develop a game. I can see that there are these, easy access tools right in front of me to use. Just know that like most commercial releases don't have like a single like person that did everything on it. And if they did, they likely had some sort of financial backing to allow them to do that over a long period of time. But in most cases, though, you'll see a developer name like on a Steam store page, and it's like the person's name, and that makes you think, oh, this person did everything, and that's usually not the case. Usually, the music or the art or some other facet UI is done by someone other than the developer that has their name on it. What'd you say?
Manifold Garden, perfect example.
Yeah, and to be fair, he actually put studio on the end of his name as opposed to just saying his name. Because I'm thinking of certain developers that just literally put their their first and last name as the developer name. Which again, it's like I'm not like up in arms about it. Do what you do, like call your company what you want, or represent yourself as you will. But it does create a perception, right? That's not true. A false perception that there's a lot of these amazing indie games that were just absolutely, maybe they were championed by one person, but they were not created start to finish in every single facet by one person.
See, my into like one person games was Stardew Valley, which was one person to a ridiculous degree. Like you built a game engine for it, but
right.
It's an exception for a reason. Like that is just not what game dev looks like.
Right, and I would even point out that was kind of what I was referencing before when I say there was still financial backing there for that individual 100%. To work, I think 6 or 7 years on that project before it released, which is not really a smart move in most cases nowadays. A 2-year development cycle max is really encouraged nowadays because you don't know if you're going to have a hit or a dud on your hand until you get it out there. In certain ways, so. Spending 7 years on a game is an incredible gamble in the first place.
It's just 4. I looked it up.
Oh, it's 4 years?
Still a lot.
Okay. 4 years. Thank you for clarifying that. Like, I don't know where I got 7. I'm not sure where I thought that, but maybe that's Manifold actually. Maybe I was thinking Manifold because Manifold was definitely like 6-7 years.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But Manifold, of course, had financial security as well through platform deals and such. So. In those cases, and of course it wasn't just one person working on that game. So, but back to Stardew Valley, it was one person. They had the financial backing from, I believe, a significant other that allowed them to do that over a long period of time. And so they got to realize, I guess, that dream we're talking about. But ultimately, that is a unrealistic dream because, I'm not sure about the scope. Stardew Valley's scope is pretty decent for what it is. But if you have like a bigger scoped game, which is very possible than Stardew Valley's, like you doing that solo seems almost impossible, like impossible. Like Stardew Valley is made, I think, specifically in mind so that a solo developer could do all of it. Like could potentially pull it all off.
Harvest Moon had very much laid the groundwork for that game. Like he didn't reinvent the wheel.
Right, exactly. Like he was taking something that had already, and we see that all the time, by the way, with new Steam releases. Taking something that has already done, something in a genre or even just a gameplay mechanic that you've seen before in a single game from 5-10 years ago that nailed it, but that's gone stale a little bit, and we need new games that kind of bring that back up. And if you could put a little extra twist on it, you might have a hit on your hands. So Stardew Valley certainly delivered on that front, and it's just one of those games that I think I just point out that the reason why it's a solo situation is because they had no financial concerns in terms of I have to get this done, by this time, or I'm out of money, or that kind of thing. It wasn't, or maybe if they did have concerns, they were much less or much lessened from what you would expect from like the average startup developer.
And one thing that most people, I guess, don't realize that the vast majority of even the solo developers, like for instance, I have Telepath Tactics up here right now. It's basically a solo developer, but I'm not sure about music. I think music might also be, but usually music and graphics or art design or something along those lines are almost always outsourced. They seem to be the biggest thing that you just don't want to use base assets for, right?
Right. That's like a worthy semantic to talk about. Is that like it may be someone like a Sinister Design, right, yeah, who is Craig Stern, that is Sinister Design. That's it. He doesn't. I don't even know if he necessarily contracts out for other people, but he does outsource. He does like bring in music, that he didn't necessarily create. He'll bring in, like you said, maybe. I think he does create his own sprites and things of that sort.
No, he doesn't. I've talked to him about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a great. So that's a great example in terms of. Okay, yeah, you're doing everything yourself, but you didn't create it from scratch. It's not something that like every little asset was created from scratch. So it's a pitfall to think that those developers are doing that. If they're not working with other people, they're using outside resources as well to benefit that was created by other people, like the music, the graphics, etc. So that's a good point. Just don't think you're going to be able to pull that off without either burnout or, the right kind of schedule for it, or with the right scope. If it's a really small project, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, even beyond that, it's don't limit yourself. If you like, I know my artistic skills are terrible. I've gotten a lot better over the years, but they're horrible. I would not want something designed with my artistic skills. If I was going to do something that's like a commercial, whatever, I would totally hire an artist to do that because I know that's not something I'm strong with. So if you're like, I want to do everything myself, you might be limiting yourself, and potentially throwing people or turning people away from you actually drawing them in with a unique art style and something interesting, because you're like, I want to do it myself, but I don't really have any talent in this field. It'll be good enough.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about graphics. That whole argument.
And that's the operative phrase, is good enough. If you're good enough at something, you can do that as a freeware or free release kind of thing and stuff. But once you step into the world of commercial release, you need to be doing the things that you are excellent at. And anything you're not excellent at, you need to be finding other people that are excellent at what you're not excellent at to join you and help you make that commercial release happen.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It goes back to like the pitfalls of indie studios, though. So I think it's kind of that at an indie studio where budgets are much more limited. There can be some.
I think that's.
I don't want to say pressure. It's going to depend on to do more than you're excellent at, because we don't have the budget for a team of 15 experts even.
So here's what I think about that, and this is getting into our kind of our main topic of the pitfall of finances, which is I think the above and beyond everything else that we're talking about today, how to fund your studio, how to make sure that all of your staff or contractors, etc., are paid what they need to be paid, that they're taken care of, that you can work this job, that you can do this thing, and it can be your job, and it can be your the thing that sustains you. There's a lot to that. That's it's a very challenging, very hard thing. With the sorry, I had a point there. What we were just talking about before Tiny Disaster that you were saying. Run me back real quick. I just lost my thought.
Indie studios not being able to afford 10 experts, so everyone has to do a little bit more.
Thank you. Perfect. That's exactly what I need. So
thing on that too when you're done.
Okay, cool. So if you can't pay for the best or the established status quo, look at the best practice person that you'd want to get, or if you wanted to go after get the best musician, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's likely a pipe dream, right? Not all of us are going to have $250,000 to drop on art, that kind of thing. I totally get that. So what you need to do is you need to get into collaborative spaces with other people that are looking to kind of prove themselves, that haven't had the chance to yet. There is excellence in people that haven't had a chance to prove themselves yet. And so these people, I'm not saying you should exploit anybody here. That's not what I'm getting at, but rather likely these people that haven't had a chance to show what they can do yet. You may have to give someone younger than you expect an opportunity that you're I thought we were going to be something the same age, in mid-30s, someone who's might fit the bill in their 20s, but it just hasn't had a chance yet, or is just getting started, would work for the amount of budget that you have to offer. The idea with that kind of thing for me is try to make sure it's fair for everybody involved. So you really don't want anybody working for cheap. I feel like that's really unfair because a
lot of people do.
Well, if you work for free, the person that is involved that's working for free at least has the freedom to be I gotta work for you whenever, or I'll work whenever I want. You know what I mean? If for some reason you're working for free from someone and they're controlling you, please get out of that relationship immediately. That's a horrible relationship to be in. But if you work for cheap, to me, that's really bad on both sides, because the boss is always going to be well, they're not doing enough because, I'm paying them. And on the other side, you're well, you're not paying me enough to do enough. And so there's this back and forth there. So you want to make sure that whenever you are able to budget for the area, you make sure that's enough to satisfy someone taking over that area and going forward with it in a way that they're happy to do so. and they're satisfied by that, and that your budget can satisfy it as well. Is it a balancing act? Yeah, absolutely. Indie Brothers deals with this all the time. Like, we want to make sure that everybody involved with Indie Brothers is doing the amount of work that they would like to do, that they kind of need to do to get by. Like, right? Like, it's some people have, just, I need this really part-time. I've got my own full-time job or whatever, and I just need a little extra income on the sides. Other people are like, this is my main squeeze right now. I need this to be, these hours to be what they are. And I like that guarantee from you as a boss. And as a boss, I have to say, yeah, I'm going to be able to do that for you. And now it's the balancing act of now committing and making sure that we have that budget always and forever until either something changes or they move on, or there's the different things that can occur, of course. So it's a thing that you have to keep in mind, that when you have all these different people coming in, that you know kind of who you need at that maybe expert level and who you need at maybe a mid to entry level. And that can be where you can maybe like reduce your budget a little bit. Again, this isn't saying don't pay people what they deserve. I do believe that, but the difference between someone on the up and coming, where they're just trying to establish themselves, the rates that they're going to be satisfied with, versus the rates that someone feels that has already proven themselves, that has hits, that is legitimized across, like the industry or whatever. It's a big difference. And it's something that you will feel majorly if you say you want like a professional, well-established, music person. That can cost you six figures really quickly. And if that sounds like a lot of money, it actually isn't even all that much. Like, if you look at the greater scope of some of these development budgets and such. But if that does sound like a lot, then we're talking about you needing to look at like a smaller scope type of thing, and some of that smaller scope is, giving people that maybe haven't had a chance yet, and not just new to the industry, but people go into places where people just don't get opportunities very much. Like there are spaces and there are safe spaces online where like women, LGBT, people of color go to try to find jobs that they feel like are going to be good for them to get into, and they're looking for people that are interested in offering those kind of jobs to them. It's a thing where you have to do the work to go find sometimes if you don't have the money to get someone that's well established and already that's done a million things, then you have to do the work to find someone who is maybe a diamond in the rough. And I'd like to think that the two people I'm talking to are diamonds in the rough, like right here. Like, I think we found Tiny Disaster through a process very similar to what I just described. And I can tell you that most of the YouTubers I've talked to, I wouldn't want to work with Bumpy. So you know what I mean? Like, so I feel you have to do the work to find these people out there. They're not just going to come to you necessarily, but you can go out there and have conversations. And I mean, I haven't said anything very specific, but Discords, subreddits, other forum spaces, other spaces of discussions that take place. Get in there and see if there's other people that are interested in what you're even selling. Maybe it's not even that you are saying, I need this, I need that, etc. But you're saying, hey, I have a project I'm working on. This is kind of like, some of the areas that I'm good at. Here's some of the areas I'm not good at. If anybody would like to collaborate with me on it, please let me know. And then you guys can kind of go from there in terms of what the specifics are in terms of the contractual stuff. Like, is it actually going to be, are you working for free? So is that other person working for free? And is it just like kind of a collaborative effort that if it makes money, there's a good split down the line in terms of what you've thought of? Or do you have a budget? Are you bringing someone on? So there's a lot to consider there. But I think I've gone through it for the most part in terms of what I wanted to say on it. So
okay, well, one of the things that you mentioned was you look for somebody that's a little bit maybe not proven, tried and true, tested, or what have you. You're looking for upcoming stuff. So I have Battle Brothers up there. I don't know the story behind it. I know that the company and like the developers and all that, it's all based in Germany, and so are the composers. So it may have been that they knew these people, but Breakdown Epiphanies I had never heard of before Battle Brothers, and they've done a few things since, but the Battle Brothers soundtrack is phenomenal. and that's just 2 guys. So like that's not. I would put them on par with almost any game out there, from what I've heard. Like they're phenomenal, and just really really good. But what I wanted to mention before, like, at the very start of this, Tiny Disaster said, as an indie developer, you don't have a big budget to really go out and do all this stuff. So, you might be really good at coding, but you don't have all these other things. I'd say it's almost more of a, you kind of have to do tiers, maybe, of like, I'm really good at this, I'm excellent at this, I'm good, I'm not so good at this, and then go, all right, well, clearly these are my weak points, and I'm going to need help in this. You can't just be like, I'm really good at this one thing, and then, try to be a solo developer off of that. So at that point, you'd be like, well, art is clearly not my strong suit, so I'm going to go look for an artist. Or I don't want to just use basic, free, copyright-free music for my, stuff. I want
Royalty
to,
free, yeah.
royalty free. There you go. I want to go and grab an actual composer or something and have them create a soundtrack for me from the ground up. And there's a surprisingly large amount of people who just want, I don't want to say exposure as in work for free and get the exposure. That's horrible. I've heard so many horror stories about that, but they are looking for exposure, and they're willing to work at maybe a more reasonable rate for the project you're working on. Again, pay them what you can, and try to meet what they're asking. But there's a lot of people that's willing to work for much less than what you might expect. That's still,
we're all in
a lot of
different
skills.
spaces. Yeah, we're all in different spaces and places in our life, right? And I know how I felt in my early 20s, in terms of what I would work for back then versus what I would work for now, right? Like, it's different. And that's okay. Just don't be exploitive as the person that's in control of that, right? And I think I think that my philosophy personally, I really enjoy is don't put yourself ahead of anybody else. So if your boat's rising, then make sure that the people that are involved with your studio is rising as well.
And like you said, with like looking into minority groups and stuff, I think the big thing, because I was definitely that person who was willing to work for free to like get experience and stuff on the resume, because no one ever wants to hire you as your first game kind of thing, all of that. But being able to do that 100% was a place of privilege. I'm sure there were people far more talented than me who couldn't afford to just, well, I'm good this month budget-wise for whatever reason, so I can work for free. It's not an option for everybody, which is where it gets unfair. And like a lot of similar people tend to rise to the top. So that is what.
That's a great point. All you can do is try to like advocate for these folks and give them a chance to maybe make it in the industry. Again, some of them are so passionate about it that they're willing to work whatever full-time job they have, and then come home from that full-time job and give you a couple of hours of their day, to give you that, to get that experience that they're looking for, to get to push further into the industry and such. So it really is just trying to have these conversations one-to-one as you kind of meet these people and move towards potentially partnering with them or collaborating with them in some degree, and understanding what works for them and what's best for them. And then that you can carry forward together in a really healthy way that way. And it lets them do what they're good at, and what lets you do what you're good at. Like you were saying, Bumpy, with the developer and the designer aspect, the best thing that you probably need to be good at, or at least one of the best things you better be good at, in addition to like, a random other thing, art, etc., music, is you got to be good at making a good game, right? The design, the development, like that's on you. Or I mean, if it's not, then go find somebody that you can partner with, that you can take some of your ideas that can translate into good design, right? Because that good design is where everything starts, and then you build around that. But if you have that not just the good idea, but the good full design document figured out and stuff, then you can say, now I have a really clear picture, like you were saying, Bumpy, of what I need to get pulled in, or who I need to pull in the spaces that I need to have covered to make this to complete this project and get it out there.
Yep. One of the things, like I said, I don't know, I have a kind of a weird relationship with working for free, because essentially that is what I do for YouTube all the time, is I'm working, and you just hope a paycheck comes in. But it's a little bit different. But I did, for an entire year, I had here locally, I volunteered at a radio station. I did a lot of audio editing and stuff for their morning show, cut it up, sent it off to other places. And then I did my own show once a week. It was from 10 to midnight on Saturday, and picked all the music, wrote my script, did all the voiceover, all that stuff, and it was great, but like it wasn't leading anywhere. And once money started to get involved, just like the demands went up through the roof, and it's like, yeah, I'll pay you for like 10 hours, but I still expect you to do like 40 hours of work. I'm like, what is that, man?
Yep.
So,
It can't be afforded. But your point is still taken, that because of the situations you were in, you did what you could. Yeah. You got to be passionate about something for a little bit, and then that sort of situation called for you to have to make more money, and it just wasn't going to happen through that. At least you got that experience, and hopefully something comes along in your future if you're still interested in doing that down the line, that you get a chance to do that again.
Well, that's the place. Skills with what I do now, so it does help. So I got something out of it even beyond that. So
right, and I just think that it ties back into what we're talking about. It's like if you're not in a place of privilege, it's definitely hard.
Yeah.
But and hopefully you find your way through however you can, and like best of luck, because it's going to be such a challenge, right? Because you have to deal with things that a lot of people in a privileged seat don't have to, and they find their way easier to where they are. So I do take my hats off to people who have to work from basically from the ground all the way up. It takes a lot of effort, and I think we all know that in different ways. Most of us have little privileges and stuff that have helped us in certain ways as we kind of discover and talk about this more and more. And have these kind of open conversations. But I know even saying that the three of us have all gone through our own struggles and picking ourselves up and putting ourselves in the positions we are today. So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to get all lovey-dovey, but massive respect for everybody involved that kind of grinds for them for what they want to do, even when the situation doesn't allow for it.
Says, what about public domain picks and music? I do think that's a great way to kind of get started. Like, it's not going to be a make enough money to fund a studio level of game, but you can start with a game there's free assets everywhere.
Right.
Itch has tons of packets of them, or for $10 you can get a bunch. You can start with something that isn't truly original.
Yeah.
Build up experience, build up that budget, and build from there.
Is it likely you're going to pull up? Is it likely you're going to pull a lot of commercial revenue from this, or a lot of major money from it? Probably not if you're using public domain stuff and public music, but you can establish, who you are as a studio. You can establish a community of people who play your games through that process. We've talked about this before, the idea of if you don't have to rush to get a commercial release going and out the door to make your studio a living, breathing thing, then taking that slow road of establishing community can be really, really beneficial in the end, because by the time you get to that commercial release, you're not anonymous anymore. You have an audience, and people know about you, whether it's through socials or just through your game development efforts. There are people, everybody thinks that you have to do the social media stuff, and maybe to some extent you do, but look at folks like Tales of Maj'Al's developer. Look at AI War 2's developer. These are not people who are on social media all the time.
Nope.
They're not mixing it up all the time, but they are connected to their communities. They are connected through the means that they want to be to their communities, and they're building through there. And when they release a game, people come along with that.
There's one major problem with using public domain picks, music and stuff like that, assets and whatnot. And unfortunately, and I've seen it many times, the gaming community as a whole is just a bunch of nasty, bitter, evil people. And they will tear you apart. They will shred your game saying, oh, it's just was RPG Maker game this, oh, that's just basic music from that, oh, you stole assets from so-and-so. It's horrible. People suck.
It's just sort of the isolating of the communities in that case. Are you making sure it's getting to the right community? And of course, some people will always come in the door, whether they're what you're wanting them to or not. I noticed that.
If you sold enough copies for those people to take notice,
probably a good thing, right?
Made a pretty decent jump anyway.
Triple A, this happens a lot. We see this. They were talking about this with I can't believe they're using some of the Pokemon animations that they used in the last game. It's this is very disconnected from an understanding of how things work. As far as
from
development
reality.
goes, it's from reality in general, but also just how things work in the in the space of development, creation, reuses of assets. Actually, if you look at lots of different industries, that is movies, things like that. It's a very standard practice to be able to reuse. Think about the Wilhelm scream, which is finally gone away. Like I feel like as a thing that was it was a thing until like the 2000s. Just this fake, this weird scream that just make no sense. Thrown in so many different action movies and things like that.
Yeah, even classic Disney movies, they've done like side-by-side comparisons. If you can see, it's different characters in the exact same scene in different movies. Disney does it. Like it's
right. And
I don't know why people get so upset because it's crazy. It's like, well, why do I have to change slightly how a person climbs a ladder when I already have it on lockdown and you guys loved it 10 minutes ago? Like, why is that a problem now?
And the key thing from the developer's perspective, and this is something that we talk about with Vertigo all the time, is it costs money to create those assets, right? But once you have them made, it actually costs less money to use them and make another game with them. Exactly. Cook Serve Delicious has benefited from this massively. There would not have been a Cook Serve Delicious 2 or 3, or probably definitely not a 3, if there wasn't for all the assets that we created with 2. Because a lot of the assets we were just able to move right to 3. It was very easy. Now, did we not make a new game with 3? No, we totally did. We totally did. Like, and Bumpy will tell you we did. But like, it's absolutely like something about like, I guess it's just one of those things that is I feel like it's one of the topics that when it hits with the masses, there's not a whole lot of lazy dev. Not a lot of understanding about why they're doing it. Even you know what I mean. It's as if it's a wound. It's very similar to the Epic Game Store exclusivities. Yeah. These were thought to wound consumers at first, and that was not the case. It was to sustain the developers, right? Like so, horrible. So it's just. I mean, but I get it. I get how some consumers are like, even if I knew that, I don't really care. I'm a consumer. I mean, I don't get it. But
I want it on Steam. I press a button and it does the thing. It's like, dude, press a different button. It's fine.
Right. Am I not surprised that this is happening though? Yeah, I'm not surprised. So it's just you have to be. That would be me being disconnected from reality. Tiny Disaster if I was surprised about it. So
there's a level of entitlement that you can be wary of, but you're still need make smart decisions. Period. That's all you can do.
That's exactly what it is, entitlement. It's like, how dare I have to click the Epic icon instead of the Steam icon? Oh, really?
I know I have so many games on Epic and I have never played anything there, but I go there and I get the free game and I'm more aware of a game.
Yeah.
It's a win for me.
Yeah, and if, I don't know, if you run into people like that, it goes back to what I always say, that we talked about on the show a bunch. Just be the most reasonable person or out of the two of you. And the rest of the community will be able to understand what's going on there. All right. You know what I mean?
Let's move on to it's a little bit of a weird worded one, but I think I'll try to throw it in as different reasons for crunch, as far as AAA studios do it for one reason and indie studios oftentimes will do it for another. As Tiny Disaster pointed out. So do you want to start us off, Tiny Disaster, on this one? Maybe rephrasing the question a bit better.
Yeah, that side note was just more for you guys trying to tell you what I was talking about. But the pitfall in general being crunch. Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm saying I didn't do a great job communicating it here.
No, it's all good. We were just making fun.
What was I going to say? Crunch in general, I think working in video games is a giant pitfall, and kind of what we were already talking about with not being able to hire your dream team in an indie studio. At the end of the day, if there's a deadline approaching and the management team hasn't properly allotted how long things are going to take, crunch becomes a thing in indie studios. I do think it's heading in the right direction faster than AAA, and the conversations are being had across the board, but it becomes something of well, if you don't do it, there's literally no one else to do it, and we're not going to hit our deadline, and then we all lose our money.
Well, I think it starts from a point of it's a fail of management when crunch happens. It's a failure of the understanding of the schedule and how that works. And then when that happens with most and then when you work with, I've been lucky to work with some seriously reasonable indie developers. What happens when you don't meet the deadline? You move the deadline. Push it. Yeah. What happens when you don't meet a partner's deadline? Well, we look to find a way to work with that partner again in the future. And you know what I mean? Like, if there's just sometimes you got to take the L. you got to be like, you know what, we're not going to get there on time without really putting ourselves through the ringer, a thing that we don't want, or ourselves, or people on our team. And this also stems from the idea that if you're a multi-game studio, which is what I think a lot of us strive to be, you got to be able to move on to the next project. Like, that's not going to be as easy if everybody was just going 100 miles an hour and 100 hours a day, in the 24-hour day to try to get that done. Like, I think that the reason there are still indie studios just like AAAs that are going to hold certain deadlines. There are certain things, like when we work with indie publishers and they have a major platform deal. That's pretty serious. You don't want to miss those deadlines. You know what I mean? Like, you want to make sure that you hit those things. But I've noticed that at least if it can't be done, or if it has to be done at great expense, in terms of crunch, at least they can have that conversation with the platform holder to say, hey, we're just not going to get this done in time. Can we get this deal sort of in the future, or rearrange it in a way that works for us when we are ready to go? In most cases, I think the answer is going to be yes if you've already gotten that far with the platform holder. So it's really about understanding what it means to miss a deadline and what that actually means to, the partners involved, your player base that has been waiting on the game. You have to weigh those factors in, but they shouldn't make you never delay. Or make you say, no, we have to get this done on time. We have to crunch and make this happen. It's first understanding if as a scheduler or manager or whatever, you're like, I screwed up. It didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And this can happen for a lot of reasons, by the way. Like, I mentioned this, I think, in my notes somewhere, the difference, and I think we've talked about this once or twice before, but let me know if you guys need any specifics on the differences on the definitions of this. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns when you're coming up with a business schedule or a business plan, or anything where you're saying, over the next 2 years we're going to try to accomplish this.
I can break it down.
Kind of thing.
Essentially, there are things that are going to be a problem, things that or that you don't know but are aware are going to be a problem, and then stuff that you have no idea is going to come at you. Perfect,
right? Yeah. So the known knowns are like, hey, you've seen the developers. This is your first time, but you've seen developers 100 times out of 100 go through these hurdles. So we have some known knowns that we're going to anticipate for in terms of schedule. And not only that, but there are certain things, like I said, that are like that you kind of mentioned, Bumpy, that are like harder to pin down in terms of specifics.
Like maybe a beta test, right?
Right.
You don't know how that's going to go. You might have to do a bunch of bug fixing before you can release the game. Maybe you're ready to release. You let a bunch of people get their hands on it, and that's a possibility. So that's a known unknown.
Yeah, or like my example in the notes was simply like people taking days off, sick days, personal days, things that you go, well, I don't know exactly when this is going to occur, but let's build this into the schedule that there's going to be this less many work hours, based on the fact that we know people are going to take vacation, people are going to take time off or need time off at random times, and then of course the unknown unknowns are just the random events that you don't necessarily you can't plan for at all. Pandemic. So just add an extra month or two, like, you know what I mean, for those unknown unknowns, because you might need it and you might not. If you don't, it's okay to shorten the schedule, right? Like, it's okay
if there's not another global pandemic that everyone has to adjust around.
Right. That's like the biggest, craziest example. I know I had another one that was like a little bit less crazy in terms of like the biggest, most obvious example of that happening. But let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. But it's still possible to occur. Having to make a major pivot in design that makes the previous budgeting of art, music, etc. moot would be like a more like kind of common example that we've seen over like the last decade with developers.
Like Stars Unreachable. What was the game called? I know that
Stars Beyond Reach.
Yeah. Which is the game Beyond Reach, right?
What's that, Stars?
Right. So with Stars Beyond Reach, we got to a point where it just became clear that we weren't going to be able to complete a commercial game that was worth releasing. Unfortunately, we'd already built a lot of hype up to that point, And so there's this non-existent game that everybody really wants right now.
Didn't it get like attempted redesign like 2 or 3 times? You said something like they were going in one way, and then it's like this isn't going to work at all. So then they changed it completely, and then that didn't work either.
So the third pivot, and then at that point, financially, we had our hands up. Yeah. We had our hands up. It's just like we cannot continue to invest any more money into this.
Is that
it's not money into the pit?
I know this is different, but the whole pivoting thing, isn't that kind of where, was it Star Wars Rogue or The Last Federation came from? One of those two things came out of a pivot in direction.
Yeah, and at one point we were doing like a raptor game where you just run around as a raptor and mess up tech and stuff, and like we thought that this was going to be the next big thing, and everybody was just like, it's cool, but it's like whatever. It's just like a raptor.
Is this before or after Untitled Goose Game?
This was before Goose Game, but it was after Goat. It was after Goat Sim, yeah. So it's not like we were novel, but
yeah.
But my point,
I think with The Last Federation, it was I think it was a real-time strategy game, like ish, and then you're like, this isn't going to work. We need to make it turn-based. So I think you made it turn-based, and then you spun off the idea and the concept and everything from that into the roguelike of Star Wars Rogue.
I'm even fuzzy about that at this point. You might be right.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm sure you're right.
I know what he's talking about, but I actually don't even
remember the details.
know. Yeah. It's like I don't actually remember if that's true.
5 to 7 years ago, something like that.
Oh my gosh, those ones, have been a while, but absolutely, it's a thing where you just don't know as you get into it. Like so many times, Chris Park to me is a genius. I mean, he's a genius level designer. He'll put out his ideas, and you just go, man, I trust where this is going. Like we're going places with this design doc, and he gets 6 months in, and he goes, nope, this isn't working at all. What? It's not working at all. What's going on? Well, it's like bubble pop. It's bubble wrap popping fun, but it's not actually fun. Okay. So we got to do a pivot. It's crazy how you can have these amazing, well thought, kind of design principles put into play, thinking this is going to be great. And then when the players bump against it, it doesn't work. Yeah. It happens all the time. And so that you can't, to me, it's still an unknown because you really don't want to think, we're going to have to do a massive pivot, but maybe you should make it a known unknown if you don't know for sure that you're locked into your design and that the design is going to sell really well, right? Like exactly. Most of the time, I think it's less extreme, right, Bumpy? Like most of the time you go in there with your idea, you pitch it to the players, they play it and they say, oh, I like what you have here, but it's just kind of boring. There's just things that they tell you that you think, okay, I can adjust. I can make this happen with what I have now. But sometimes that bigger pivot is required, and when that's required, it's either time to wave the white flag, or make sure that you have planned for the known unknown or the unknown unknown of this pivot, which is hard to say if you did or not, right? Like it's hopefully you did, but I think some of the best studios around right now, they had really, really, really good planners that lead the studios, really good forethought on what could occur, not just what is hopefully going to occur for us, not just like what I want to occur, but what I really expect might happen, and some things that I might not expect happen. I'm going to factor those things in and plan accordingly. Though that is the best way to try to avoid that pitfall. You have to do it at the start.
Yeah. I went back and I looked, and thing that I liked that a Tiny Disaster said was the reasons for crunch for an indie developer or indie studio versus a AAA developer. Generally with AAA, they're like, hey, we get this out by this time, we make more money, blah blah blah. It's greed focused. It's hey, I don't care about you as a person, we need to get this going, you're going to put in these extra hours. And on the indie side of things, you're running out of resources. Maybe you don't have the funding to continue to pay people and so on and so forth if it drags out for another month or 2 months. So sometimes they try to cram it all in a little bit at the end and just release the game into the wild and hope it does okay. So and that's just because they're running out of whatever time, money, people can't maybe stay on the project any longer, or whatever the case is. So there's a different reason for the crunch.
Yeah, I mean, AAA is just like using people up like cattle or resources, or the idea of just I'm in a place where I'm in a place where I can just have a studio of hundreds and hundreds of workers, and when the game is done, after I've used them all up, they're all fired.
Yeah.
And if we do another game, then maybe we rehire them, but no guarantees, that kind of thing. And that's definitely a AAA thing that I've been kind of abhorrent about for a really long time. As one of my best friends worked in game testing for a lot of major studios down in Los Angeles and Santa Monica and those areas. Like, and I won't name any names, but
do you need to
all of them,
get your daughter?
I will. Yeah, I will in 1 second.
Oh,
Yep. Thank you for reminding. I appreciate you reminding me. Thank you. And the other point I had on that was, so as the indie, you are slaughtering yourself essentially. It's like if you're crunching, you do so at the detriment to yourself. And if you're the boss, then and you're doing it, then you may be more AAA than you want to be right there. In terms of your behavior and how you're acting towards your staff. I have to run and talk to my daughter for 1 minute. We'll be right back.
So I just wanted to share something that, like, I've experienced seeing how Cup he deals with certain things. So with Cook Serve Delicious 3 releasing, I don't know all the ins and outs from the other side, but I've talked to him a little bit about it. But basically, like, the lead up into release and even the first day, maybe 2 days of release, Cup is pretty much on crunch time. He's doing all this stuff, but prior to that, it's, it ramps up and gets busy. But then after that, he just gets a big chunk of time off, and everybody else deals with what they need to deal with. So if you are going to do something along the lines of crunch, which, everybody has deadlines that they have to meet, and sometimes you just have to work overtime. It's just a thing. Don't do it to the point where you destroy people. Try to plan it to where, hey, you're going to be really busy at this time. Hey, you're going to be really busy at this time. And try to spread it out so you don't destroy the whole thing, and then give them breaks afterward. I mean, if you can avoid crunch altogether, great. But if not, get what you can out of the people and don't overdo it, and then let them, relax and recover from that.
And part of it is like crunch shouldn't be it should never get to the point where you're even a month out from a release and all of a sudden it's shocking to the management team that we aren't as close. Like, at every point you should be able to see how far behind you've fallen. Like, it shouldn't be a surprise. So it's good management.
I agree. Cup, real quick. I was saying how essentially leading up to, like, Cook Serve Delicious 3's release, you got busier, and then, like, incredibly busy, and then you had, like, a week to unwind, recover while everybody else took the torch from you. So, like, in that sense, there's a little bit of crunch, but it's also protecting you because you get through this stage and you're okay, and they're going to let you take the time you need to recover. What did the other folks do during that? Were they just as busy? I would assume not quite, but...
Right. Well, like, if you did the art for the game, music, that kind of thing, you're like, whew, this is a victory lap, at that point, when you get to release, because you're not actively working on anything at that time. Your work is done. So a lot of the people that aren't the lead developer that's still kind of issuing, and the programmer that are still working on, like, bug fixes and such, like, their job is wrapped. And writers usually, they're done. Obviously, anybody who was part of the narrative design, any voice actors, those kind of things, it's just all gravy for them. And that's fair, because what I've learned personally about my job and the way I work, and this is, again, just personal to me, that kind of thing, is I need to stop being. A few years ago, I told myself I need to stop making myself have work 40 hours a week. On off weeks when I know I'm going to have to work 80 to 120 hours a week on some particular intense on weeks, right? Like, that kind of thing. Not 120, but like just a ton of hours on certain weeks. That's okay with me. I personally am, like, totally okay with that. Like, the thing that was hard for me, like I was just mentioning, was actually taking the downtime that I needed to take.
Yeah.
I had to kind of discover that myself, and also have supportive people around me, like my boss, people I work for and stuff, to encourage me to not feel guilty, right? Like, I think there's this feeling of guilt when you're like, I'm going to be idle for a week, that kind of thing.
Or I rested a little bit, I'm ready to go, and they're like, no, like,
right.
recover,
And that's the thing, is that
rest.
Right. You can feel like even taking a day off is all you need, but that's not true, especially if you put yourself through 2 weeks to 6 weeks of very intense work. And when you release a game, when you have those Steam stats in front of you that we talked about last week, when you have social media stats in front of you and things are popping, at least to some degree, it's really hard to step away. It's really hard to like take your foot off of the gas pedal. And so some grace there for yourself, but also just having someone, like you said, to either just say, "Hey, we'll keep our eyes on our eyes on it. If we need anything from you, we'll message you. But otherwise, just go hang. We'll message you like on your phone. Like we'll text you. Like one person knows your phone number maybe and can text you. And there's boundaries set there versus like we expect you to be on Discord all the time. It's like, well, I'm not on Discord all the time if I don't feel like it, right? Like so, it's like I don't necessarily want you to think that I'm going to be able to get a hold of if I'm off during that time, like, make sure that extra layer is there kind of thing. But it's also about like, it's both have a way to get contact with me, but also don't contact me unless you absolutely have to kind of thing. That's where I'm at now. But 10 years ago, I'm exactly like you were saying, Bumpy. It was like, I don't need a break. We got to keep it going. Do you see the sales? They're moving up. We're going up. We got to keep going, and so you just don't stop. And then 2 months later, you're like, why is my eye twitching? Or why do I have headaches every day? I think
it's knowing yourself and the difference between like being excited and fueled by it.
Yeah.
Like you're in the zone. This is like the highlight of your career, blah, 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 versus I am so beyond stressed about this.
And it's also like, for me, like thinking about it, like from like maybe like an athlete's perspective, if you're really good at your sport, just constantly trying to get better out of it, constantly trying to get better at that, and not actually like taking care of yourself outside of that is not going to be a benefit to you in the end. It is more beneficial to you to think, oh, I'm so passionate about releasing this game and, having, people like it and play it. Well, then it's more beneficial to you to actually build a really healthy schedule for yourself during that time. So that you can still maintain that schedule, or at least to some degree, some of it, after you get through launch, right? Like, and not hit a point where you're like, okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to go disappear for 2 weeks while I go into a coma-like recovery. Like, you know what I mean? Like to just get back to normal, and maybe getting back to normal isn't even getting back to normal. I've gone through burnout periods before where I feel like I may have given up pieces of myself that I've never personally recovered. And that's not to scare anyone, but to be real about what burnout can potentially do to you if you go too far.
Yep, I agree. All right. I think we've kind of touched on the topic of crunch, what it means for indie developers and why it happens sometimes, or indie studios, and the difference between them and AAAs. We'll go back through it. We kind of already talked about this a little bit. Maybe we'll just kind of pinpoint a little bit more. You can kind of go down like a laundry list because you have a little bit better understanding of what you need to do. But where to spend the budget, and then we'll move on to I think our final point after that. So
right. So where to spend the budget? Yeah, that's something that Tiny Disaster was talking about. I think we were talking about a few weeks ago or something. Was the idea of obviously if you don't have a killer design idea, you shouldn't go out and get a spend $100,000 on an artist and $100,000 on music, that kind of thing. If you're like, it's all for something that is not necessarily going to catch on with players in the first place. So, understanding where to invest your budget comes from the idea of making sure that, your core is really solid to begin with. You shouldn't be going out looking for the, not ancillary, but the things that are sort of the dressing on the cake, so to speak. Before the actual sponge itself is really, really good, if that makes sense. Like I think that's a British term, sponge, but like the cake itself needs to be like really excellent before you start dressing it up and that kind of thing. So that's what I think of when I think of using your budget in the right way. It's like, hey, don't go throw, and we talked about this, I think, about with like advertisements and marketing and things of that sort. Like, make sure that this is like, with beta testing, make sure that your players are really, that are playing the game, the people that are testing the game are actually really satisfied and willing to want to spread word about the game before you start making, taking strides towards marketing, advertising, that kind of thing. Because if that's not there yet on the beta side, or with like the beta testers, then you're wasting money putting it out there when people coming back to see it are like, nah, pass, or no thanks, or it's not what I want, and now I'm going to really bounce off of this even if I see it again, that kind of thing. So, anything else you were thinking about in that regard, Tiny Disaster, when we were talking about that note?
I don't think I try to remember where my head was at. Like, we've talked about different parts that are connected to this so many times.
Yeah.
This mostly stems from the idea of like you can't just fake you can't just be amazing at one thing but have a fake game or a game that's just not selling with the people overall. Like, you just can't have good art and a bad game and think that that's going to work out. That's going to be a really poor use of your budget, most likely, because commercially it's not going to then turn around and provide the totals that you need. I think, like, again, most educated people getting into design and development and the industry will understand this. But if you don't have a lot of education in this, and when I say education, I don't mean like general education. I mean specifically in design and development and how, indie game development works and all that kind of stuff, then, you might think that that's something you could pull off. You go, oh, I don't necessarily, I have a very, sort of, this game has been done before, but if I make it look a certain way, or if it comes off a certain way, it's going to be great. That, to be fair, it does happen. But
it happens successfully an annoying % of the time. But one's like, it's not like never successful.
It feels like it's an annoying percentage of the time, but I bet you the actual analytics and data would show it different, right? Like, it just feels
that's kind of where I was going. Like, you see it be successful, and you think, oh, well, that's annoying. But the amount of people who tried it and weren't successful is so much bigger.
Right, and if you actually look at things that are, at least by the masses, considered good, in most cases you'll find that they've brought something different to the table, new to the table. If it's the same exact idea that's already existed in some other aspect, and that idea is still accessible, then usually the new thing will not prosper. Now, if the new thing is replacing this old thing that doesn't exist anymore, that was amazing, that everybody liked and stuff, then they find that they definitely will find that space and be able to take advantage of it. But a lot of it has to do with quality of life improvements between that, whatever that first iteration of what we're talking about is, in the second iteration too. So if there's not a lot there, then it can get really frustrating, Tiny Disaster, because there are a couple projects out there that you're like, there's nothing here, there's nothing additional here that suggests that this should exist, that this should even exist, let alone be a million seller, etc., things like that.
So. We talked about last week, and also kind of in line with what Bumpy was saying earlier, with the gaming community will eat you alive for reusing assets and whatever. That is not the majority of the market, especially if you're looking at mobile games or anything designed to just make money really quickly. There's still the vast majority of people haven't seen literally every game that's come across Steam's new and trending like we have, kind of thing. So many people are just kind of like, oh, this looks cool, and not thinking about the history of it. And it's not a long-term success plan, but when you see it being successful, that's probably part of it. You hit the right audience at the right time, and they don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then there's always the what I lean towards, which is being the majority of the time, anytime you see a game that you're like, this just came out of nowhere and these developers just hit it big. If you actually look into it, a lot of times there's 5, 6, 10 years of toiling and just working their butts off on contract work or freeware space, or that kind of stuff to get to where they are. So there are always exceptions to the rule, but few and far between, as we always say. And not something that you should be banking on when you put together your design doc and move forward into, I'm going to be adding on pieces to this to make this a full commercial game.
Well, I know we talked about where to spend your budget. I might have been even in industry pitfalls, just in general game industry pitfalls, because essentially making a game is way more expensive than you expect if you have no idea what you're doing. You're just like, oh, I'm going to make a game. Yeah, it's gonna be quite a bit, but that's fine. So we did cover that, I think, like I said, in game industry pitfalls and maybe some other one. A bit more like where to spend budget. Like we talked about a little bit earlier. We can go to the various different things as far as, hey, I'm good at this, but I need an artist. I need this and that. But I mean, overall, like I said, I think we've covered this already in a couple of past talks. So let's move on to, I guess our final point would be when to get marketing involved.
Yeah, I think that's
We've talked about this a few times as well.
Yeah, but it's fine to go over it
and as a marketing company, this is kind of where our wheelhouse is.
Yeah, for sure, right? And with 5 minutes left, we can definitely touch on based on this in a concise way that I think helps us wrap up the show for today. If anybody has any questions, I know we've had a few people chime in the chat, but if anybody has any questions, if anybody has any ideas on any other pitfalls that we may not have mentioned, please feel free to mention it in chat and or on our socials on Twitter, etc. But yeah, so with marketing, when to get involved, right? That is definitely a pitfall in terms of too early versus too late.
And it's almost never too early, but it happens.
But there is a too early. There is much more likely a too late, which is Bumpy, I think we were both thinking of, is that too late is much more likely to occur than too early.
Happens more frequently.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think that you got to come up with the idea that when you push your assets out there for the first time, like you have to have it's a first impression, and first impressions last. So you don't want to go out there for as a first impression too early. We did this with A Valley Without Wind, and the art assets were all programmer art. Everybody was clamoring to see our next game, and the hour went well, and this was like the Wild West of indies. And we were just like, we'll just show whatever right away. As soon as we have any kind of, framework, we'll show it. And boy, was that a mistake. Not necessarily because everybody was offended by it. Some people were in the moment and stuff. Were like, this doesn't look very good. And game websites didn't want to cover it based on that kind of stuff. But the key is that when the game did gain popularity and people wanted to cover it, guess what they got in the Google image search when they went to go look for the first, images of A Valley Without Wind? That programmer art that looked really bad and janky and especially in retrospect with the current art and stuff, you're going, oh my gosh, why did we do that? That cost us so much. And now every time I have to, I don't have to anymore, but maybe 6-7 years ago, every time a new article would come out, I'm like, oh cool, we're getting coverage. You go there, you're like, oh my God, they're using that image. And you'd have to either try to follow up and try to, it's like this is just not good because you just knew it was pushing out the wrong thing. You didn't want people to see that. You wanted people to see the new, the newness with how we had got the final product versus that. So too early to me is a lot of times in the look, right? Like what we're talking about here is a lot of times like the visuals. You don't want your visuals to be, depends on the game, right? Like, cause I think like a roguelike is like, you can go for maybe even some placeholder visuals in that regard, because people with roguelikes aren't necessarily looking for the most dazzling looking game. You know what I mean? Like, that's not why they're going to play that game, the roguelike. They're going to play that because of the loop and showing me as the roguelike fan what's interesting about your game versus the other roguelikes I've played. What are you bringing to the table, kind of thing. And that can be shown, with placeholder stuff. It totally can be shown. But, if you're a Whitethorn Games kind of game, like Whitethorn is one of our publisher partners we always mention. They do a lot of narrative kind of stuff. You're not going to want to show off anything until it's, basically that final product, or at least close enough to it. Because a change in the art style at all is very obvious, right? Like very much like a very drastically different thing. And so if you're pushing out marketing assets too early on that front, it's probably not going to look as good as it does with the final product, and B, you're just kind of setting different expectations versus what you're delivering on. So yeah, I think there is a too early, and that comes from visuals mostly. And also, like, if you make sure that you have something significant to announce, like I think it's always something that we're working with this battle we're having with marketing, with partners, with like on the marketing front is, people are like, I want to do a big PR blast. Okay, well, what's going on for the game? Well, like nothing. It's already been released. Okay, it's like it's just not much to work with here. Like we need something. We need an event. We need something to call to action. Something that's gonna stir people to actually give you consideration. Because if not, they're not gonna care.
Something like a big update, DLC, multiplayer being added, something.
Sale, a new announcement for the next game. Give me something. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be anything. If you don't want to do extra update work and that kind of stuff, okay. Well, what can we do that's not fake? That you're not just gonna say and not do. You know what I mean? Like it has to be something that you're gonna actually do. And give me something of substance to work with, right? Ultimately, so that's like that's on the other side of it. That's the too late time. Like the game's been out for 2 months and hasn't sold very well. Now we're gonna get a marketing and PR firm. It's too late.
Before the game release, maybe even 2 weeks before is sometimes still too late. Like we can only
do so much. We can only do so much with the amount of time that you give us, right? Like I think that impact. People think impact is instant, and it's just not. Nope. Impact takes time to make, and if you want a PR firm to make a big impact, you're going to want them on as early as possible, as early as sensical, right? Like as makes sense to. You don't need a PR team during your first several months of creation, brainstorming, development, pipeline, design, and then finally I got an idea that we're going to push forward with. You don't need a marketing PR team during that time. It's if you have someone to consult with that has that expertise like us, then that's really nice to have because you can start talking about some of that stuff like the Fall Guys. Fall Guys were thinking about marketing PR from the conception of Fall Guys, and that was clear. And that can really benefit the game, like in terms of getting to the success markers you're hoping to get to.
All right, for me, I feel like there's a pretty you don't necessarily even need to have the PR team 100% through all of this, but I would say the easiest way I would throw it out there. I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong here, but maybe leading up to when you're going to actually launch your store page on Steam, assuming you're going to launch on Steam. So month beforehand, maybe a couple weeks at the minimum. That way we can look at stuff. We do like Steam store page optimization. Us personally as Indie Brothers, we do these things, and we can give you your best foot forward. And then maybe you're going to go for a long time before you even decide to go into early access. Maybe you don't need us that much at that point, so you step away and then you bring us back when you're getting ready to launch in early access. And so basically the big points where you have that big visibility and you're doing something massive, I feel you need to have your PR team working with you on that at that time specifically, and to lead up to it that makes sense. So like I said, a little bit before the store page launch, when you're planning to go into early access around that time, and then depending on how long your early access is, maybe you're gonna have big milestones and stuff coming through.
Yeah, and that's like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then finally, upon release, that's probably the biggest one you're going to want to have your PR team, maybe a month, couple months, maybe even more, leading into the release of the game.
And that's like the biggest logistical contract structural issues that Indie Brothers always deal with is you don't need to hire us full time at any point, really. Actually, quite actually, you don't. And I think that there's a misconception about that. And, can we only use? Yeah. I mean, we would absolutely consult with you. You can absolutely hire us full time, and we do that, and we have, and Tiny Disaster can tell you firsthand about that very recently. So we do get that opportunity every once in a while. We don't mind that, but we're not just going to be like, oh, you're not. We're a PR team that only works like blah 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 hours, and this is not how we approach things. That's not how we would get work. For me, the hardest thing is to try to get a developer to understand. Let's start out by doing 20 hours this month as we head into this milestone. Like you said, Bumpy, don't just do it for no reason. Have the milestone set up. Like 20 hours to start with this month. Next month, we're going to do 40 as we hit our first milestone. Then the month after that, we'll bring it back to 20 because it's going to be a downtime period and stuff. We don't want to disconnect entirely. Or if you guys want to say, let's just put it on hiatus, that's okay with us too. And then we pick it up at this point. But when we go on hiatus, a lot of times we just don't pick it back up again. And that's like on the developer. Like, we'll follow up and be like, hey, is that update coming out? That kind of stuff. And a lot of times it'd be like, oh man, we already did it. What? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, what? We had a chance to work together. So, and they wanted to, but because of like the way that the structure works of game development, the way the milestones work, and the way you don't need a
stuff out and everything,
and you don't need marketing full time on that kind of front and stuff. This is why Indie Brothers is diversified as well. Why we have social media, why we have Stream Team, that kind of stuff, because we know, just doing the marketing and PR aspects of it is so ebb and flow. Like there's just sometimes where there's just not that much to do, other than there's always something to do in terms of research and preparation and all that kind of stuff. But I understand when developers say, well, that's fine, but I don't want you to be working as many hours I don't want to pay you, basically, bottom line, as much as I would pay you during a milestone, period. Like, that has to be different. We're okay with that. But the problem is it's kind of complicated because of the situation. It just is. It's like not easy to work that out. You have to have those conversations, and the developer and you have to be on the same page, or we have to be on the same page with the developer in terms of, this is how this is going to get done, and this is no wasted hours or no wasted time, because that's what developers and budget's very important to them. They don't want to waste their budget. They don't want to give Indie Brothers, extra hours while we would do the most we could with them. Maybe it just didn't make sense to have those extra hours in those downtime months, and that's not offensive to us to have that reduction. But it is on the developer to understand, this is when I'm going to need this amount of work from you versus this time, and make sure that that's spelled out ahead of time so that they can, we, Indie Brothers, or they, in terms of your marketing team you hire, can do the best job possible. Because if you don't give them enough time and heads up and that kind of stuff, you're not going to get their best work, almost guaranteed.
Yeah. Okay. I think that pretty much covers it. So again, I just want to reiterate, and this is something I've said even before I ever even thought that I'd be able to work here. Starting up an indie game or releasing a game or whatever the case is, there's people out there that have been through the cycle. They've done the stuff, whether it's through us, somebody else, maybe you have a friend or another developer who's been through it. Just there's help out there, and it's a stressful time. It's really crazy. It's chaotic, and you can burn yourself out real quick. So it is very good to find the people that actually have the skills to make that burden easier. You brought it to the 99-yard line. Let us finish it off for you, essentially.
Yeah, and continue to have,
but still,
for sure, and continue to have conversations with mutuals and people that are doing the same thing that you're doing, and hear about what they're going through, and hear about what their solutions are. I'm on a couple of email lists that make massive differences for me sometimes, to be able to read that someone has gone through something similar and that they tried something that I haven't tried that worked. Oh, I never thought about that. That happens all the time for me. And so to have that kind of, to just put yourself in a room where you can have those kind of conversations and see what people are, because there's always new things happening, always new things going on, always new products, new apps, new, trends that come into play, that if you're kind of more aware of, you have a better chance to navigate what you're doing to success.
All right. So, one final thought too is, before I ever started working here, I often would suggest or recommend Indie Brothers specifically, from just me dealing with them and so on and so forth over the many years. Whenever I did talk to developers who were like, I don't know how to do this, or I'm getting ready to release the game, so I've always recommended people find help, and I did the best I could. I've always been one of those people that tried to, like, hey, well, you can go sign up here, and they send keys out to places, and here's a list here that has a bunch of content creators. I've always been trying to be helpful in that sense. So yeah, seek help, guys, if you need it. Any final thoughts from you guys before we announce next week's thing?
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody if you're celebrating. If not, hope you have time off anyway. Everybody should get the next 4 or 5 days off, in my opinion, all over the world.
Okay.
Whether you, you only,
even those of us in Canada who have no holidays right now.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, even if you don't celebrate, why don't you just jump in and take some time off? But
my wife better make me a turkey tomorrow.
I will point out that Bumpy is our stream team captain. always has to work when everybody else has to be off, because usually these major Steam stream sales take place during the holidays. So give Bumpy a little bit of love if you get to see him over the holidays period. He's going to be on his Twitter posting about it, all the places he'll be on the store pages, and I'll be retweeting and liking it as well. So if you guys are on the twits, check it out. Other than that, yeah, everybody have a really good vacation. And next week, what are we doing next week?
Game trailer reviews.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Tiny
one.
Disaster have been eager and salivating to do this. So I'm interested to see how this goes. It's not really something I've done, but yeah, I know what I like, so it'll work out.
Yeah, exactly. You got opinions?
Exactly.
Oh, I think this will be just the same as the Steam page reviews. Yeah. I think the two of you will really enjoy getting involved, and I'll save my voice. It'll be great.
Sounds like a plan. So next week, I don't think I'll be dead by then. I might be. It's basically the end, but I'll have a little bit bigger of a break. I basically had 10 minutes before we started this one after 2 hours. I get like a 2-hour break or something next time. It'll be great next week. All right, sounds good to me. All right, so
when's your next stream?
What's that?
When's your next stream? Is it today?
6. I think I'm going to do it at, oh god, did I change this? Yeah. I'm going to do it at 5:45 today.
What game is that?
Eastern.
What game is that
It's
for?
going to be AI War 2.
AI War 2. Okay, so if you're hanging out, check out AI War 2's Steam store page. Bumpy will be on at 5:45 Eastern.
Yep. And then after that, into my normal Tome stream directly following.
Which you'll never give up, even when you're in the middle of all this stuff, I've noticed.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they're also one of the clients that need a little bit of extra, and all their stuff is 50% off, or the whole bundle for 56% off. See?
And that's why and just some insight, that's why we do that. That's why we stream during this time, is because we're getting that extra exposure, and there's a call to action to do so.
Yeah. So, if you guys need some Steam streaming, hit us up. We do that.
There he is.
All right, that marks the end of the stream. Next week, guys and gals, we'll be doing the game trailer reviews. It will be at 3 p.m. Eastern for hopefully about an hour and a half or so. And Tiny Disaster says it's all community submissions, just like the Steam store page reviews, the mini reviews that we did. So look forward to that, and see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.